Educational technology has traditionally been defined around different forms of technology, and but increasingly it's been considered to be not just the forms of technology or the materials that you might be using, but also to include the sort of social and educational practices in which the technology is used. So you have to think not just about the technology, but also the ways in which you support people to use it, the kind of teaching and learning practices that you've got and the goals that you're aiming for. The Educational Technology Topic Guide, we found that there are quite a number of pieces of strong evidence for changes in classroom practice and learning outcomes around teachers' use of educational technology, particularly interactive radio instruction, using mobiles to bring audio into the classroom or video into the classroom when they were in a context of teacher professional development. In terms of students' use of technology, there was actually much less evidence, and we found a lot of instances where students were using computers, or computers that were there for students' use, but actually there was very little use for teaching and learning going on. A few notable exceptions around project-based learning for students, where they were given resources and teachers were helped to introduce new forms of practice. And the other sort of student uses that seem particularly effective, particularly around early reading and the use of e-readers for literacy. And they were the main sort of findings that we got. There are a lot of studies that talk about educational technology and the challenges of sort of setting that up effectively, but what we were really looking at was hard evidence on how the use of the technology had changed the practice of teaching and the learning outcomes that you were getting. And we felt that there was a lack of clear sort of summary and synthesis evidence that could inform policymakers and education advisors in terms of what kinds of educational technology they should promote, or in what kind of context those approaches to educational technology were effective and worthwhile. We were surprised when we were reviewing the 80 studies that we looked at that there were actually very few studies that provided hard evidence of changes in classroom practice. They're really, if you were looking at quantitative evidence of practice, they were down to a handful of studies. And similarly for students' use. So there were an awful lot of reports that talked about the challenges that they faced, or some of the difficulties and how things might have been done better. But when you came to look at actual evidence of impact and solid sort of foundations for your view of what works, there are very few studies that informed that. And we think that's probably partly down to that, you know, that there are many studies that reported not getting the impact they were looking for, so that I think there are those sorts of things. But also I think there's a lot of programs that are implemented where they simply don't get to the level of evaluation that says, well, what happened in the classroom, or what happened to the learning outcomes? They sort of stop at the level of, did teachers think it was good? Did they like it? They don't sort of go down to the level of evaluation of saying, what actually is the consequence or the outcome of that for classroom practice or for learning outcomes.
So the Educational Technology Topic Guide, it comes from increased interest in the potential of technology to have an impact on teaching and learning practices and to raise learning outcomes. But it also comes from a place where evidence base has largely been geared towards assessing the access to education technology. And while that's really important, there's clear areas that need to be explored in relation to the impact it can have on actual teaching and learning practices. The topic guide comes up with several findings. At a practical level, it identifies effective educational technology programs as those that have really clear curriculum focus and relevant curriculum materials. Also, effective educational technology programs seem to really embed strong evaluation systems from the very early stages. And I think it's important that how programs are going to really impact on teaching and learning are built into those early stages of program design. In terms of the evidence base, obviously this guide is trying to build on the existing evidence base, but it also identifies gaps around the need for further impact evaluations and around closer look not just at how technology is being used by teachers, but what the impact is on pedagogical practices.
Our overall aim is to improve the learning of boys and girls in the poorest countries. So we're interested in where the use of edtech can enhance that and also provide better value for money in what we're doing. So that's our fundamental where we're coming from on this, in this area. A lot of the emerging use of technology is coming through our country programs, in our quality improvement work, for example, in our work in teacher development, and also actually in some areas in our evaluation of education programs. So the use of mobile technology, for example, we've got some examples of that. In addition, we've got 3 very specific, innovative new examples through our Girls Education Challenge program. In fact, we didn't actually particularly look for edtech solutions as strategic partnerships, but they came to us. So we've got a partnership with Discovery Communications, we've got a partnership with Avanti, and we've got a partnership with Ericsson. All 3 of those programs in different countries are looking at how edtech can be used, and very interestingly for me, used to target one of the most marginalised group in education, which is girls from the poorest communities. So in that aspect, we're particularly focusing on the use of edtech in education to reach marginalised groups. Those 3 programs are going to be evaluated quite closely. They're very innovative and they're pilots, and I think that's probably the case when we look at all our education programs, the use of technology. We are very much seen as this is a new area and we need to build the evidence base. I think the guide is a huge contribution to our work on edtech and in education, because it pulls together the evidence we know to date, which is fantastic when you're a country-based advisor or you're working in a policy team, because we now have got, if you like, a sort of a baseline of where we are in terms of our knowledge and understanding, and we can build on that. So for country advisors who are talking to ministries of education, who are designing programs, to have that guide will be hugely beneficial. And I think it also is a kick-off starting point for us to know where the areas we need to know more about. And that's certainly in my sphere of work, where I mainly work on the Girls Education Challenge at the moment. We know where we want to target our evaluation and research work thanks to the work that's been done on the guide.